The last thing we were talking about is what's impossible to attribute to God. And we didn't finish that, but let's just recap quickly so that we can continue from where we left off. So he said, may Allah have mercy upon him. وَمِمَّا يَسْتَحِيلُ فِي حَقِّهِ تَعَالَى 20 صِفَةً. Amongst what is impossible concerning God, exalted is He, is or are 20 attributes. Because He told us 20 attributes that are obligatory on every accountable person to learn, according to those who said 20. You know, others, they said 13. That's the stronger saying. But he said 20. And so, just like it's obligatory to know 20 attributes that are necessary for his self, it is then impossible to attribute to him 20 attributes. وَهِيَ أَضْدَادُ الْعِشْرِينَ الْأُولَى. Those are the opposites of, or what's contrary to, the first 20, yani, the 20 attributes that we mentioned. Wahi, and those 20 impossibilities are al-adam, non-existence, which is nothingness, wal-huduth, and createdness, wa-turuwu al-adam, and vanishing, wal-mumathalatu lil-hawadith, and resemblance to created things. And there he went into detail. That's the third, yani. 1, 2, 3. That's the fourth thing. Sorry, I didn't lift my finger. That's the fourth one. And then he went into some details for this fourth one. He said, بِأَنْ يَكُونَ جِرْمًا, by God being some substance of volume. أي تأخذ ذاته العلية قدرا من الفراغ, meaning for his exalted self to take up some amount of space. أو يكون عرضا. He continues here, giving details about this fourth impossibility. Or that he would be a fleeting quality, يقوم بالجرم, some attribute that exists through a substance of volume. أو يكون في جهة للجرم, or that he would be in a direction of something with volume. أو له هو جهة, or that he would have a direction himself. أو يتقيد بمكان أو زمان, or that he would be bound by place or time. أو تتصف ذاته العلية بالحوادث, or for his exalted self to be attributed with creations. That is, for him to be a vessel for events. أو يتصف بالصغر, and he's still going here under this fourth impossibility. Or that he would be attributed with smallness. أو الكبر, or bigness, يعني size. أو يتصف بالأغراض في الأفعال أو الأحكام, or to be attributed with motivations in his doings or rulings. Then he got back to those 20 impossibilities. So the fifth one, he says, وَكَذَا يَسْتَحِيلُ عَلَيْهِ تَعَالَى أَلَّا يَكُونَ قَائِمًا بِنَفْسِهِ. And likewise, it is impossible that he, the exalted, would not be independent. بأن يكون صفة يقوم بمحل. And then with this one, he went into detail too. How would he not be independent? By being an attribute that exists through some vessel. By being an attribute that exists through some vessel, a vessel for attributes. Yani, a body or something with volume, a particle existing through it. The attribute, not the volume itself, not the particle itself or the body itself, but the attribute that exists through that volume. The volume is the vessel that carries the attribute. So then that means the attribute, since it has a vessel, that means it's needy. It's not independent. So it's impossible that he wouldn't be independent by such impossibilities as being an attribute that exists through some vessel. أو يحتاج إلى مخصص, or needing a specifier. So that's 5 so far, right? He said they are non-existence, createdness, vanishing, resemblance to the creation. That's 4. And then he said, and being dependent, being needy. That's 5. And then he mentioned the sixth one. The sixth one. وكذا يستحيل عليه تعالى ألا يكون واحدا. And also it is impossible that he, the exalted, would not be one. بأن يكون مركبا في ذاته. Then he goes into detail there. By being composed in his self. That means constructed. أو يكون له مماثل في ذاته, or by having a semblance in himself. That means resemblance. Right there. By this statement, he shows us that oneness and dissimilarity are synonymous for God. Being one and being dissimilar are synonymous for God. So, like we said last time, oneness for Allah, being one or being described as or called one for God, its meaning is different than for the creation. Because for God, oneness amounts to absolute uniqueness altogether, being dissimilar to anything. In his self, أو صفاته, or his attributes. أو يكون معه في الوجود مؤثر, or by their being in existence with him, an effector. That means a creator. في فعل من الأفعال. A creator, an effector, yani a creator of any doing whatsoever. So that means then that confirming God's oneness is a confirmation of destiny. Did you make that connection before, brothers and sisters? Hopefully you did, when you thought about your religion and the correctness of your belief and the profoundness of it intellectually. You probably said, yes, it makes complete sense that there's a qadar, destiny, because God is one and God is the only creator of everything. So being that God is one and the only creator of everything, and he has no beginning and he doesn't change, then it must be that he willed everything in eternity, and therefore there is most indubitably a destiny, an unchanging destiny. That's why Imam Malik, when he was asked about giving a Muslim woman in marriage to a Qadari, someone who denies destiny, he recited this ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah, وَلَعَبْدٌ مُؤْمِنٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكٍ. Indeed, a believing slave man is better for marrying a Muslim woman. Then a pagan. So when he was asked, he wasn't asked about an idol worshiper. He was asked about someone who claims to be a Muslim, but he denies destiny. So Imam Malik considered the destiny denier a mushrik, and that's correct. The blasphemy of a destiny denier is very intense blasphemy because it is a blasphemy that confirms, it is a blasphemy of atheism and polytheism at the same time. From one perspective, it's atheism. Denying destiny is atheism. That's the creed of atheists, usually, that there's no destiny. But also, denying destiny is a confirmation of creators, many creators besides God. So that's polytheism. So how severe is that blasphemy? Shirk and atheism at the same time. وكذا يستحيل عليه تعالى العجز عن ممكن ما. And likewise, impossible for him, exalted is he, is inability or weakness. Inability to do anything possible. So what number was that? That's 7. And likewise, impossible is that God would be unable to do anything possible. An ignorant person wouldn't understand this statement. An ignorant person wouldn't understand this statement like a Christian. When we say it's impossible that he would be unable to do anything possible, so a Christian might say, so he can have a son, he could have a child. So we would say, no, that's impossible. That's not possible. That's impossible. So he might say, so you're saying God can't do something? So we say, no, we didn't say he can't do it. We're saying his power does not pertain to what's impossible. And attributing to him creating the impossible is an absurdity. It's an intellectual absurdity. Impossible by definition means something that can't happen. When we said it's impossible that he couldn't do anything possible, when we said it's impossible that he couldn't create anything possible, that's not us saying he cannot create the impossible. We're not saying he cannot. We're saying his power doesn't even pertain to it because impossible by definition means something that can't happen. I'd say to someone who's arguing like this, you are the one who's supposing that something that's impossible could happen. So what's wrong with you? Don't you know the meanings of the words you're saying? If something is impossible, how would it happen? But to someone like a Christian, the impossible could happen because doesn't the Christian believe that God died? He says Jesus was God and then he died and then he came back to life. Yeah. The Christian believes that God died and he believes that God is his own father and that God is his own son and that 1 and 3 are the same. So he does believe in the possibility of impossibilities. He believes that impossible things are actually possible or even necessary. In other words, a Christian believes, or someone like a Christian, that what's impossible could actually exist. So he doesn't believe in something impossible. That's irrational on his part. As-Sanusiyyah goes on to say, وَإِيجَادُ شَيْءٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِ مَعَ كَرَاهَتِهِ لِوُجُودِهِ. And impossible is the creation of anything in the world without his acceptance of its existence. The creation of anything in the world without his acceptance of its existence. أي عدم إرادته له تعالى. That means without him willing it. That's impossible. أو مع الذهول, or that something would be created by God forgetfully. That's impossible. أو الغفلة, or heedlessly, or frivolously. يعني in futility, that he creates anything in futility. That's impossible. That's the meaning of Allah's saying, وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاءَ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا بَاطِلًا. We did not create the heaven and the earth and what's between them frivolously. In futility, without any benefit. Oh, bitalil, or that his creating would have a cause or a reason. His creating would have a cause or a reason. That's impossible. His creating is without a cause and without a reason. He creates by mere will. He creates without tools, without effort. Oh, بالطبع, or that he would create by nature. He doesn't create by nature. That means it's not the case that he is a creature that has a nature and then he does whatever is his nature to do. Like, isn't the nature of fire to burn and the nature of water is to cool things? So it's not the case that God's nature is to create things. No, he doesn't have a nature. So that's impossible. Rather, he creates by his will, and he creates by his eternal choice. Allah has attributed with the attribute of ikhtiyar, that means choice, and God's choice is his eternal will. Then number 8, وَكَذَا يَسْتَحِيلُ عَلَيْهِ تَعَالَى الْجَهْلُ وَمَا فِي مَعْنَاهِ بِمَعْلُومٍ مَا. And also impossible is that God, exalted is he, would be ignorant, or anything that means being ignorant about anything known. He's not ignorant about anything. Not fundamentally nor willfully. And I say not fundamentally means he's not originally ignorant about something, nor willfully, which means he doesn't will for himself to be ignorant about something. That's also something implied by the denial of destiny. When someone denies destiny, then he implies that God is willfully ignorant, willfully ignorant. Because by denying destiny, he's saying God didn't will for everything. But if you ask him, does he know everything? He'd say, yes, he knows everything. So how would he know everything without willing everything? That means then he's willfully ignorant, actually. So put that together if you need to think about that. You said, so Allah wills anything to exist without a wisdom and benefit, and is that applied entirely? No, I didn't say that. I didn't say he wills without wisdom and without benefit. I didn't say that. We said here, among what is impossible is for anything in the world to be created without his accepting its existence, meaning without his willing it. And among what is impossible is for him to create something forgetfully or heedlessly, or to create something by a reason. He doesn't create by a reason, he creates by will. I didn't say he doesn't create for a reason, I say he doesn't create by a reason. Like, for example, how do you hold something? You hold it by a hand, for example. How do you speak? You speak by a tongue. You have a tool, you have a means. He creates without tools, without means. He doesn't have a reason that by which he creates. Rather, he creates by will. And he doesn't create by nature. So we're not saying he doesn't create a nature, saying he doesn't create by nature. He creates by will. He creates by choice. وَكَذَا يَسْتَحِيلُ عَلَيْهِ تَعَالَى الْجَهْلُ وَمَا فِي مَعْنَاهِ. And likewise, impossible for him, exalted is he, is ignorance, and anything that means that. بِمَعْلُومٍ مَا. Ignorance about anything known whatsoever. That's impossible. So let me just count them again really quick here. Non-existence is 1. Createdness is 2. Vanishing is 3. Resemblance to the creations is 4. Being dependent and needy is 5. Not being one, 6. Being weak, 7. Here, for anything in the world to be created without his acceptance. So that means being forced. That's 8. So being weak, that's contrary to having power. Being forced, that's contrary to having will. And then that's what he said right there. Meaning, his not willing for it to be. So that's 8. And 9, also what's impossible is ignorance. 10, death. 11, deafness. 12, blindness. 13, not speaking, muteness. Yes, so 13. وأضداد الصفات المعنوية واضحة من هذه. And the opposites of the other 7 attributes, the 7 that we say, it's not the strong saying that it's obligatory to know them. Those ones that are called the ma'nawiyyah attributes, so you'll review that. The opposites of those are known, are clear from these that we have stated. 7 more makes 20, and he summarizes all of that by saying, the opposites of the ma'nawiyyah attributes are clearer from these. That statement in itself supports those who said that those ma'nawiyyah attributes are not obligatory on everyone to know. Because if you learn the 13, you will understand those extra 7. You won't miss those extra 7 if you learn the 13. So he's so close to agreeing with us by saying this. The opposites of the ma'nawiyyah attributes are clear from these. So that's finished talking about what's impossible to say about God. And then he goes on. May Allah have mercy upon him. وَأَمَّا الْجَائِزُ فِي حَقِّهِ تَعَالَى. Now concerning what is possible to say about God. Exalted is he. فَفِعْلُ كُلِّ مُمْكِنٍ أَوْ تَرْكُهُ. That is doing, yani creating, anything possible. Or not. Yani to not create it. To create some possibility is valid to say about God. And to not create that is valid to say about God. Amma burhanu wujudihi ta'ala. Now concerning the argument for God's existence. Exalted is he, the argument for his existence. So he didn't give that yet? No, not yet. What did he do? He told us that God exists, and he told us that non-existence is impossible. And now he wants to argue, to give the argument for God's existence. Page 4. Let's see here. Yeah, so he told us God exists, so wujud, existence. He said that the attribute of existence is sifa nafsiyah, the self attribute. Then he went on to talk about the 20 attributes. Then he went on to talk about what's impossible to attribute to God. Then he went to talk about what's valid to attribute to God. Valid means not necessary. We talked about what's necessary, the attributes that we already discussed. And now he wants to give some arguments. You know what argument means. Argument doesn't mean quarreling and shouting at each other. Yani, not in this context. Argument here means substantiating claims. Substantiating claims. You said, what's something valid to attribute to God? What's valid to attribute to God is doing anything possible or not. أما برهان وجوده تعالى. Now concerning the argument for his existence, exalted is he. فحدوث العالم. It is the createdness of the world, or the occurrence of the world. لأنه لو لم يكن له محدث. Because had the world not had a creator, that is, had the world not had someone to give it, to make it occur, someone to make it occur, muhdith, بل حدث بنفسه, and had it instead just happened by itself. That's atheism, to believe that the world just happened to happen. Yeah, it just happened by itself. So had it been that the world did not have something to make it occur, and instead it happened by itself, لزم أن يكون أحد الأمرين المتساويين مساويا لصاحبه راجحا عليه بلا سبب وهو محال. He says, if that were the case, then that would dictate, that would necessarily mean that there are two matters that are actually equal. What are those two matters? Existence and non-existence. Existence and non-existence. They are equal. What makes them equal? They are like a door being opened or closed. So, isn't a door being opened equal to a door being closed? Yes, they are. It is. They are. Because either way, it needs someone to make it that way. That's what makes them equal. Whether the door were open or were closed, it needs something outside of itself, yani, something other than itself, to make it be in one of those two states. So they are equal in terms of the door. So what's like that for us as creations? Existence and non-existence. They are both equal. Neither of them is more preponderant. So had the world happened by itself, this would dictate that one of two equal matters is at the same time equal to its counterpart and preponderant over it. Equal to its counterpart and preponderant over it. What does that mean? What that means is this. Imagine a scale, a balance, rather. The type of scale which is a balance, two pans. So those two pans, if your scale is accurate, they should be fundamentally at the same level, right? Yani, not one of them is heavier than the other one. So each one of those pans, represents existence and the other represents non-existence. So these two pans, they should be equal to each other for this scale to be right. So the scale represents the created thing in the first place. And one pan represents existence and the other pan represents non-existence. So we are saying non-existence and existence are equal concerning a created being. Because this created being needs someone besides himself, other than himself, to specify him with existence over non-existence, or with non-existence over existence. So if the world happened by itself, then that would mean one of those two possibilities, one of those pans, would be equal to the other, like we just said, but at the same time, preponderant over the other, heavier than the other. How? Why? Because if it existed by itself, then that's one of those two pans being heavier than the other. That's the side of existence outweighing the side of non-existence. The side of existence cannot outweigh the side of non-existence without someone someone beyond, someone other than this created being, giving it one of those two. So it's not possible for existence and non-existence to be equal, and for one of them to also be weightier than the other at the same time. Bila sababin, he says, without something to cause that, without a reason. That's what he said. That's what Sanusi said. Bila sabab, for one of those two equal matters to be preponderant over the other without any reason, but it's better for him not to say any reason, because this statement implies that God is a reason, and we don't say God is a reason. We say God is creator, not reason. Don't say Allah is the reason. Say Allah is the creator. A reason doesn't create. A reason is a creation itself that leads to a creation. A reason is a creation that leads to a creation. So this is the way he worded it. And what we learned from our sheikh is that it's better not to say it this way. He's not the only scholar who said this. But we don't say that. But we're going to read his text the way it came, and then we're going to comment. وَهُوَ muhal, and that's impossible. It's impossible that those two pans would be equal, and at the same time, one is heavier than the other. Wa alaikum assalam. No, not two happenings are equal. Because happening means it occurred. Happening would mean it exists. Two issues, two matters. What are those two matters? Existence and non-existence. So non-existence is not a happening. The two equalities when it comes to a created being are existence and non-existence. If something were to happen by itself without a creator, then this would mean that two things that should be equal, one of them is at the same time heavier. One of them is heavier than its equal, so that's impossible. To be heavier and equal at the same time, that's impossible. ودليل حدوث العالم ملازمته للأعراض الحادثة. And the evidence that the world is created, the evidence for the createdness of the world, is what? That the world is, that bound to the world are created fleeting qualities. Bound to the world are created fleeting qualities. So what are we saying here? Now, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, he wants to give the arguments for God's existence. So he said, as for the argument for his existence, it is the createdness of the world. Okay, so, but what if you're talking to someone who says, well, I suppose if the world is created, then that would prove that God exists. Sure, but what's your proof that the world is created? He's going to argue with you like that, a philosopher. So then he tells us the evidence for the createdness of the world is that bound to the world are fleeting qualities that are created. من حركة وسكون وغيرهما. Fleeting qualities such as motion and stillness and other things. We talked about fleeting qualities. So look all around you in this world, everything around you, in the room you are, wherever you are. There are things that are still. That stillness is itself a created quality in the thing because the stillness has a beginning. And other things are moving. Might be the hand of your clock, might be, I don't know, someone there in your house, might be you have a fan blowing, or something else. Maybe you have some water boiling, the water's bubbling in your pot. So other things are moving. All this movement and all this stillness, those are themselves created things. And the world cannot escape this. The world in totality, this whole world, cannot escape both motion and stillness at the same time. So, bound to this world are created fleeting qualities. Motion and stillness and other things like touching and disconnection. So, for example, perhaps you have a laptop on your table. So now the laptop is what? In contact with the table. So that contact itself is a created fleeting quality. It has a beginning. And then if you pick your laptop up off the table, then the contact vanishes. It's no longer existing. So then that's things coming into existence and going out of existence. That's createdness. Coming and going, vanishing and appearing. That is createdness. So these fleeting, temporary qualities, the world cannot escape them. وَمُلَازِمُ الْحَادِثِ حَادِث. And anything that's bound to something created is itself something created. Anything that's bound to an event is itself an event. Now, just to clarify some words for you that I'm using, or that we can use. We're saying created and createdness and event and occurrence and happening and start and appear. All of those are synonymous to being created. They all mean having a beginning. So anything bound to an event, hadith means an event, an occurrence. And I can say creation, that's true, but has another meaning, really, another way to translate it, which is an event or an occurrence, but still means a creation. But it's good to have these alternative words because you're going to talk to an atheist, for example, and if you say to him, the world is created, he might argue with you about the world being created. But if you said to him, the world has a beginning, then he might not argue with you because he finds a difference between those two. Because saying the world is created for him means it must have a creator. But saying the world has a beginning for him doesn't mean necessarily it has a creator. Although that does really mean that, but in his own mind, it doesn't. For that atheist, the word event or occurrence or happening or starting doesn't equate to there being a creator or doesn't necessarily imply that there's a creator, even though it really does. So, As-Sanusiyyah says, وَمُلَازِمُ الْحَادِثِ حَادِث. Anything bound to an event is itself an event. Why? Because if something is bound to an event, that means it cannot exist before an event. If something is bound to an event, that means it can't exist before any event. So anything that can't exist before events is what then? It is an event itself. Who's the one who exists before events? Allah. Only God exists before all events and all occurrences and all happenings and all starts and all appearances. But this world itself is bound to events. So it must itself then be an event because it cannot exist before events. If the world could exist before events exist, then that would mean the world is eternal and unchanging. ودليل حدوث الأعراض مشاهدة تغيرها من عدم إلى وجود ومن وجود إلى عدم. And the evidence for the createdness of the fleeting attributes is what? Observation. Observation. Observing their changing from non-existence to existence. Yani from nothingness to something. And then from something to nothing. To see motion and then to see the motion vanish. That means now there's stillness. And to see the stillness and then to see the stillness vanish. That means now there's motion. To see the contact and then to see the contact vanish, that means now there's separation. To see the separation and then to see the separation vanish, that means now there's contact. We observe that. We observe what has the very meaning of createdness. We observe that which falls under the definition of being created. So what did Imam An-Nasafi do here? He said, the argument for God's existence is the createdness of the world. And then he elaborated. And then he said, and the proof for the createdness of the world is that it's bound to created attributes. And then he elaborated. And then he said, and the proof that the created attributes are indeed created is observation. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And Allah knows best. We'll stop there.